It's no secret that one of the biggest storylines right now within the sport of mixed martial arts, one of the biggest storylines right now, no doubt about it, no secret, is Francis Ngannou versus the UFC. And Francis Ngannou holds a title that is always has been, always will be the highest ranking title inside the combat sports world, the heavyweight champion. He's the heavyweight champion of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. He is a force never to be reckoned with. This man has run roughshod through the UFC heavyweight division. He had his own stumbling blocks, but it made the narrative and the story even greater when Francis somewhat, had his peaks and valleys and was able to find a way in becoming eventually the UFC heavyweight champion that, most of us knew he could become. Now, where Francis is at right now versus the UFC is very intriguing because in his last fight, UFC heavyweight title defense against Cyril Gane, Francis made $600,000 in that fight. And $600,000 to me sounds like a lot of money. To you, it might sound like a lot of money too. When you talk about what a mixed martial arts fighter puts on the line and how they meticulously prepare for their opponent, who they have to train with, where they have to go to maybe get better as a fighter in terms of who they have to train with for that particular opponent, Francis probably expended his reach pretty broadly, expanded his reach, I should say, pretty broadly in terms of how he was able to make himself better. And it's unfortunate to be in this situation if you're Dana, because the optics are pretty bad. Francis not only won his last fight, he not only won the fight and defended the title, but when it was all said and done and Bruce Buffer's announcing and still UFC heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou, Dana White was nowhere to be found. He wasn't putting the belt around Francis' waist, which, if you're not a fight fan, if Dana's not putting the belt around a fighter's waist, it's rare, it's odd, it makes you wonder what the heck's going on, and Dana was nowhere to be found. Francis had the belt wrapped around his waist by UFC, I guess, vice president, I guess you could say matchmaker, Mick Maynard, and Dana was in the back. And Dana says, well, I wasn't trying to disrespect Francis, I was just saying, hey, I couldn't go out there, couldn't, do it. I was dealing with something backstage. I'm not going to speculate on that. But what I will say is ask yourself this simple question. As fight fans, if you have been a fight fan for as long as I have, let alone a UFC fight fan, you would ask yourself the simple question, who has Dana not disagreed with over the course of time that has been a star in this business? Chuck Liddell even. Randy Couture, he went to court with Randy Couture, went toe-to-toe, almost literally, with Tito Ortiz as they almost fought one another back in the day over a contract dispute. BJ Penn left the UFC due to contract negotiations and a contract dispute. So we're not under uncharted territory for Francis Ngannou and the UFC to be at odds, but this is different, because the sport now is far more well known than what it was then. I bring you those names. You guys might know those names from what you've learned about the sport, but you might not have exactly watched the sport then. You didn't exactly get to see the nitty-gritty details of each and every one of those beefs, if you will. Where with this is the super fight. This one is on display, full display for anyone to comment on, for anyone to try to understand. Francis Ngannou is this close to not only making more money than he's ever made, but he's this close to finally proving all of those names that I've mentioned right. Proving that, yes, they should be paid more. And even the top level fighters, the Conor McGregors of the world that are making a lot of money, the Khabib Nurmagomedovs, in his day, during his career, made a lot of money. George St. Pierre, Brock Lesnar, these fighters, Ronda Rousey, they were pay-per-view attractions. They were pay-per-view stars, kings and queens, right? But they didn't make as much money as they should have, despite those facts that I just spitted out for you. Francis Ngannou is the reigning, defending, undisputed UFC heavyweight champion. He made $600,000 in his last fight, when frankly Francis should be making at least $1 million per fight, if not more. You add in the fact that a heavyweight champion is seen as the pound-for-pound fighter, because pound-for-pound meaning you put Francis up against any weight, any fighter, he'd probably knock them unconscious. So you have the number one, arguably pound for pound fighter on the face of the earth going toe to toe with his boss, when in reality, Francis Ngannou is a gift to a combat sports fan that should keep on giving. And instead, he's battling his boss due to being underpaid. It's a shame for Francis. It's a shame for the UFC. And most of all, it's a shame for the fight fans who have waited a long time to see the Francis Ngannou era of UFC greatness and MMA greatness, heavyweight greatness. And yet we are hearing this story. I think Francis will go toe-to-toe with the UFC, waste what is the last bit of prime in his career, and we will wonder what if for Francis Ngannou. I hope I'm wrong. I greatly hope I'm wrong. But the way things are trending, the way things are looking, Francis Ngannou looks like this is a fight that he is ready for. A super fight that, of course, Dana White is always ready to go toe-to-toe with one of his fighters when said fighter wants to make more money. As a businessman, Dana White looks at the books and says, hey, we can only pay you this much. But as a fighter, you look at what this company sold for back in 2015 and say $4.25 billion. Dana, pay me more money. And I have to side with the fighters, but I also understand the business aspect of the UFC. And I think that it's one hand washes the other. A mixed martial artist still in its infancy as a sport, a mixed martial artist knows one thing and one thing only. What choice do I have? Do I choose to make the most money, or do I choose the most notoriety? The UFC gives you the keys to the car, to becoming famous, to potentially making more money outside of your fighting career if you do find success within the Ultimate Fighting Championship. No other organization, Bellator, PFL, ONE FC, none of those organizations help you do that. So we are still within the infancy of this sport as far as what leagues offer the most to said fighter. And Francis Ngannou, Francis Ngannou, God bless him, he's fighting the good fight, the super fight. Hopefully this works out for him. I have my doubts, but I'm hoping it works out. I want to see Francis fight. You want to see Francis fight. But this is the super fight that we're watching right here, right now. Francis Ngannou versus the UFC. I'm Ryan Thomas. I want to remind you guys that this is the Thomas Take Sports podcast. Of course, you're tuning in on YouTube, Facebook, and all of my podcast audio platforms as well, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. I want to also remind you, fight fans, subscribe to the podcast on YouTube. Click the red button, make it happen, and thanks for the support. Much appreciated. Francis Ngannou versus the UFC, the super fight that is